Okay, well, welcome everyone to this session this morning about charity governance basics and Q&A. This is being put on as part of Small Charity Week. Small in national terms means anything under $1 million income. And actually, when you consider that probably, actually 75% of all groups are actually under 100,000, it's, I think small is a bit of a gross term in their points of view. So I don't think locally we would recognize that definition as small. I think we usually talk about small as being definitely 100,000 and micro being under 10,000. And most charities, in fact, nearly 50% of all registered charities have actually got less than 10,000. So anyway, but we'll be doing a series of events this week, and today's the last one of that, which is just a sort of, this session this morning is really going to be me just flagging up with you some common things that I see happening in charities, big or small. But then that should be about 45 minutes, and you can ask questions as we go along. But then there's just an open session really for you to ask any queries and questions that you've got based on your own experience or where you've got some live things going as well. It's being recorded, so after today, probably next week, you'll get a link to this on YouTube. And also you'll be sent a copy of the presentation slides as well, so you don't have to furiously scribble as I go along. All of you, I think, are members of Community Action Network, so we're here basically to support the local voluntary and community sector through empowering the voluntary and community sectors. That's mostly through giving advice and support and guidance on setting up and running a voluntary organisation, brokering volunteering. Although for you, Christine, you might look more towards Volunteer Centre Dorset rather than us. So we do the volunteering centre stuff within Bournemouth, Christchurch, and Poole. And then connecting communities, which is about bringing organisations together for peer support, advice, and working together, but also having representation and a voice, particularly with statutory agencies. This is me. So after today, if you've got a query or a question, it's come to me. Although I'd probably say, Christine, probably to contact Becky, since she's just started. Her contact details are right at the end as well. Okay.
Thank you.
But after, but if you've got anything after today, then just bang me an email or ring me. And it's better probably to ring me on the mobile rather than the office number. Okay. So, you're here, you exist to make a difference. You're not there to make money particularly. You want to make a difference in the communities that you work with, and that's what charities are all about. And you're peddling probably 10 to the dozen, trying to keep your charity going, to make those differences, driven by that, and that's great. And you do probably loads and loads of good work. So you can have the shiniest, most wonderful structure, and you can give, enjoyment to hundreds of thousands of people who are really interested in it. But actually, if the wiring that's hidden behind the facade is a bit dodgy, then there can be catastrophe. And that can quite often happen. You see in organizations, they're doing brilliant day-to-day work, but actually it's not all right in the background. It's their governance that's probably a bit at fault and actually can bring the whole edifice tumbling down. So it is sometimes important to spend some time on governance. We tend to want to make a difference to the people or the environment or to the place that you're working in, and that's where your time and energy goes. But if you take your eye off the ball about actually how you run yourself, the governance behind, then actually that could have a negative impact sometimes later. So it is worth spending some time sort of sometimes doing a sort of belly button gazing to see actually how well you're running as an organization behind the scenes. So I flagged this up because really this is a sort of basic principle for trustees, but I think it's the same for you if you're a volunteer or a member of staff within a charity. It's about always acting in the best interest of your charity and its beneficiaries. And if you have that sort of principle, if you ask that question every time you need to make a decision about doing A or B, then being able to sort of give some at least good logical answers to why you're choosing A, why that's in the best interest of your charity and beneficiaries, it'll usually work and it'll be right. And maybe even more importantly, if it does go terribly wrong, because however well we plan and do things, things can go wrong. But actually, if they do go wrong, as long as you can show that, then you won't even be legally responsible to the Charity Commission, for instance. The Charity Commission gets involved. I've just been reading a couple of inquiries this morning where governance was poor, very poor. The trustees couldn't show why what they were doing was in the best interest of its charity and its beneficiaries. And so basically, the charity's been closed down. So for sort of the next 40 minutes or so, I'm going to talk about, some things that I've seen that do go wrong and with some ideas about what to do about it. Now, some of them might seem trite, or you might think, oh God, I can't do that in our organization. But they're just ideas for you to think about. There is no one answer for every situation or the same answer for all organizations. But it's something for you to think about. And, if you want more advice and support, then, you tap into me or Becky and we can help you decide what's best for your charity in your situation. Okay. So I sort of was thinking about them and I came up with this list of 13. I hoped it was going to be less. And I did have more, but I took some out. Now, some of these you might recognize as things that are already happening in your organization, or you think they could be things that could go wrong. But I'm just going to go through these quite quickly and give some ideas for you to take away. So I find quite often, quite a lot of charities don't follow their governing document. Now, the governing document is a term that the Charity Commission use for like your constitution or rule book. It's because sometimes you'll have something that is called a constitution. If you're a charitable company, it will be called Articles of Association. If you were a community benefit society, which none of you are, it could be rules. So the sort of like general term is governing document, but it is your Bible. It tells you what your organization can and cannot do, how it makes decisions, how you record them, all sorts of things. And quite often I find that, once people have got themselves registered, they probably forget about it. And as years go by, they do their own thing. They run AGMs in a particular way, or they appoint trustees in a particular way, which actually aren't in the governing document. And the trouble is, if you don't do it according to the governing document, you can be successfully legally challenged. And there's nothing you can do about it. You can't say, oh, we didn't realize that, or we forgot we had to do that. Someone could successfully make a challenge and you wouldn't have any defense. And I say that and that does happen. And it's usually because somebody's got something against your charity, your organization. They want to make trouble. And they'll find whatever way to sort of like stick in and twist a knife. So it pays to take time to make sure you do everything according to the book, right? So don't assume read, reread, and comply. I even do that for my own organization. There's sometimes quite long documents with quite a lot of detail, but you have to follow them. And the reason why constitutions sometimes can look quite long is because people have gone to court, usually because they're having an argument, and therefore, because their constitution wasn't clear about it, it's your word against their word. So the reason why you've got more and more detail in constitutions over the years is because it's a way of stop people having to go to court for a judge to decide what to do in a situation. The other thing is make sure all your trustees have a copy. I think a couple of years ago, the Charity Commission did some research, and they found 10% of charity trustees didn't have a copy of it. So make sure they have a copy of it. And actually, it's a public document. So if you've got a website, put it on your website, rather than, I remember as a trustee being given, here's a copy of the Constitution, and you put it away in a drawer, and then you lose it and you can't find it. Whereas if it's online, like on your website, so it's available to the public, but it's also available for anyone to look at. Also, have an easy copy at your meeting, rather than people umming and ahhing. How should we run this meeting, or have we got enough people here to make a legal vote? Those sorts of things. Then make sure you've got a copy, rather than sort of like trying to remember or fumbling. But remember, it's not like a Bible in the sense that, or a religious book where people feel this is, set in stone. Actually, a governing document can be changed. If it's not working for you, or you want to change things, then change it. Don't just change the way you do things, but actually formally change it. It's relatively easy to do. And again, CAN's here to help. And regularly review it, for instance, just to make sure that it is still up to date and fit for purpose. Okay. The other thing I sometimes find that happens in charities is being unsure who are the members and who are the committee. So if you look at all legal structures for groups and organizations, there are always two groups. There are your members and your committee. And your members are usually ones that make the most fundamental changes. They agree a constitution, they change a constitution, they close it down. And then some constitutions give them other powers, like maybe the ability to elect trustees, committee members, maybe also to call them to account, and maybe to sign off particular things. But you have this group of members, and then you have a group called the committee that run the organization on behalf of the members day to day. Now, in some organizations, the members and the committee are exactly the same people. But in a lot of organizations, you will have a bigger number of members than you will have committee. And therefore, you need to understand the difference between the two, and it should be clearly set out again in your governing document. There might be a section about members and like how you become a member, how people stop being a member, and actually, as I said, what powers they have and how you run their meetings. So I've been at AGMs. Typically happens for community centres, I have to say. That actually they have an AGM once a year, they invite the whole community in, they come into the room and they get them to vote. But actually, is everyone in that meeting a member? Because if you look at an awful lot of community centre constitutions, it says that people have to apply to the trustees, to the committee, to become a member, and then are added to a list. And those are the ones that have a vote. So if you have like an AGM where you've invited everybody, you give everyone a vote, they make a decision, someone doesn't like it, they would successfully challenge to say, actually, that probably wasn't a legal vote because there were people in that room who put their hand up and actually weren't entitled to vote. So it sounds like it's being a bit sort of bureaucratic, but you do need to know who is a member. So again, follow the rules in your governing document, and then have a formal list, basically. So you have a list that you update. And I would definitely think about time limiting membership, because the trouble is, if you say, well, you become a member and then it's there forever and a day, the trouble is then your membership list grows and grows and grows and grows, and it will affect your quorum, because it might say something that, you have to have 10% of your members. And if you've got like 600 members, because you've been collecting that for 10 years, then that means you've got to have 60 people in a room to have a successful AGM. So maybe make it annual membership or 3-year membership or whatever. And it can be free, but actually you do need to be clear about this so you don't get into problems around voting. The other common thing that can happen is, of course, renter mob turns up. And again, that's happened in a community centre in Bournemouth a couple of years ago, you know, when a clique within the local community all came en masse to an AGM to try and push through their trustees to take over the community centre. But luckily, you know, they did at least have a membership list saying, well, actually, you know, you 30 haven't actually officially become a member. So sorry, you can be at the meeting, but actually you can't vote. The other thing that happens quite often is, or can happen, is that trustees are not properly appointed. Again, it's become customer practice. I know it's really difficult for a lot of charities to find trustees. So as soon as you find someone, you grab them and sign them up. But actually, again, you've got to make sure that you follow how it's set out in your governing document. And actually, if you look at quite a lot of inquiries the Charity Commission takes into charities, they find a fairly common problem is it's not clear who are the trustees. You know, there are people have been not appointed. You know, maybe they were just invited to join, or they just came to trustees meetings and start voting, and there's no record of them being appointed in the minutes and so on. So you need to follow the governing document to the letter. And the other thing that happens is that, again, your governing document might say that trustees have to step down every year and be re-elected, or that that a third of them have to step down, or they're appointed for 3, 4, 5 years. And I come across where people are there and then they never get re-elected. So again, they could quite rightly be said, okay, you should have stepped down a year after your appointment, so you're no longer a trustee, and therefore any decision you're involved in was invalid. And as I said, it's about keeping a list up to date, and maybe if they have got terms, then a bit of an indication, you know, when they were appointed, and then when their term of office might end, you know, a year later or 3 years or whenever. And the other thing that the Charity Commission does point out is that if you have a change of trustees, you should update the public register as soon as possible. If you're a CIO, you have to do that within 15 days of a change of trustees. But all other charities are encouraged to do it straight away. You can just, you know, you as charities have a login with the Charity Commission, and it's really quick and easy to log in and just take someone off or to add someone new. And I think a good bit of due diligence is to get signed declarations from trustees that they're not disqualified. There are certain people who can't be a charity trustee. Fairly common ones are those people who basically are an undischarged bankrupt or have got an IVA, you know, an agreement with their creditors, which is to prevent them becoming a bankrupt. So if you're a trustee, if you're somebody with that sort of agreement, or then you can't be a charity trustee. But there are other ones as well. Again, we've got a fairly good template that's based on the Charity Commission model that you can give to any person who becomes a trustee and get them to sign. Acting outside the objects. This is not that common, but it does happen. So I've put somebody's objects there. Does anybody recognize whose objects they are? You might even be able to guess if you read it through.
Rachel's.
Steve, yeah, sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, it's ours, isn't it?
Yeah, so it's scrap stores.
Yeah.
So this is usually quite near the very beginning of your governing document. And these, if you're a charity, these are your objects. And a charity cannot act outside of its objects. And you could be challenged by somebody by saying, well, why are you doing that? You know, you shouldn't be doing that. But also the Charity Commission could jump in and say, actually, that this is misconduct of charity trustees because they're using assets outside the objects. So you must always just, whenever you're doing an activity or looking at a new project, make sure it does fit within your objects. So for instance, if you look at number 1 for the scrap store, what couldn't they do in number 1?
Didn't they do?
Could they do something in Ringwood?
Oh, I see. So that's about the boundaries.
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hopefully everyone knows that Ringwood's in Hampshire. I'm sorry, I should sort of making that assumption, aren't I? But yeah, so because it talks about Dorset, including Bournemouth and Poole, then actually anything outside the county of Dorset would be an illegal use of resources, of charitable resources. Although number 2 and number 3 don't talk about a geographical limitation, it would just be number 1. There will be issues involved. Okay. Now the Charity Commission, if they ever did come down and say, you know, because somebody's complained to them, that's usually why the Charity Commission gets involved. It's usually because a member of the public has complained to the Charity Commission, right? And they come and ask you saying, oh, we've heard from a member of the public that you're acting, you know, you're doing something in Hampshire. Can you tell us why? And then you would need to give an answer. And if they believe it was an honest mistake, they'll just slap your wrists and say, don't do it again. If they thought you did it knowingly and it was quite a significant amount of money had been spent, actually, it's one of the occasions when trustees could be individually liable to pay back that money if they can to the charity. There are some ways of getting around it, but you need, if you're not sure what they are, then for instance start talking to us about it. But you know, if you want to change them again. They're not set in stone. It's a bit more complicated to change your objects because you have to get permission from the Charity Commission. You can't just do it off your own back. But again, you know, we can help you do the application for that. Not managing conflicts of interest. It's really difficult, this, you know, so the idea is that trustees must always make decisions in the charity's best interests. And most governing documents say that limits the amount of benefit that a charity trustee can get from their charity. It's a feeling that basically they are going to act always in the best interest of the charity, and they won't be clouded by any benefit they can receive. And it can be, the obvious one is financial advantage, but importantly, it's not just themselves, it's to close family. And it goes up, it's their parents, grandparents, and it's their children, grandchildren, but it's also their, well, charity law says it's spouses or civil partner, but they're about to expand that, the same as company law. So it actually can be someone who's a long-term partner, as if they were in a sort of legal binding agreement, like a civil partnership or marriage. But it also extends to the siblings as well. So, for instance, you know, if someone's going to be given a job by the charity and they're a close family relative of a trustee, then that's a conflict of interest. Okay, and we'll talk about it in a minute. And also, it can be a close business partner. It's where you basically have between you, you know, a controlling interest in a business. Okay, so you need to recognise that there might be times when there's conflict of interest. And the Charity Commission says you need to recognise it, you need to record it, so usually in the minutes, and then you can manage it. Okay, so it doesn't mean someone can't be a trustee, but usually you can manage it. Now, if it's a very minor view, a minor conflict of interest, then you could just record it in the minutes and say that the other trustees probably think it won't affect the decision that the trustee board is going to make, but you might feel that actually it would, or more importantly, it would appear to, because appearance is just as important as reality. You know, if someone wants to sling mud at a charity, they can say, well, of course they made that decision because that person's, you know, in business with them, or a close friend, or something like that. And therefore, the easiest way of managing that is that that trustee leaves the meeting during that bit of business, and you record that. You record they had the conflict of interest, and that basically, you know, Joe left the meeting during that, didn't take part in the discussion. Then the minutes showed the discussion and the decision of the other trustees, and then it says that Joe came back into the meeting for the next item. So it's very, very clear. So you really should have some sort of policy. Again, we've got templates to use that you can then individualize to your own. But it should be, you should also have a standing agenda item, you know, so that for every meeting, there should be something at the top about, you know, conflicts of interest for people to declare it. You might want to have a formal register of interest where you ask everyone to put something on a form and then you put it together. But I always say there's a tabloid test. You know, what happens if the Echo was to get hold of us? Could they make a story out of this? That because you've employed someone, or you started buying stuff from a shop or a business that has a connection to a trustee, actually there's something going on here, you know, so that you can push back by saying, yeah, we did recognize there was a conflict of interest, but you know, Joan wasn't involved in any of the decisions or discussions. Poor delegation, you know, you can't be everywhere all the time. So although the trustees have collective and individual responsibility, you know, they can't be there all the time. So they need to delegate to individual trustees, and that could be chairs, secretaries, booking secretary, or whatever a role, or it could be to staff, or it could be to volunteers, you know, to do particular tasks. But you need to make sure it's very clear to everyone what they can and can't do. So you need some sort of clear written delegation. So it sets out what you can and can't do, what decisions they can make as well, and how and when they report back, and the trustees should regularly review it. But there are some things that can't be delegated, very important decisions that are made by the trustee board. And again, we've got a list of that. And if you're quite a complicated organization, probably, I don't know how big you are, Christine, because you're in Dorset.
Sorry, we have a full trustee board, and all our staff are freelancers, and a few volunteers.
So is your turnover, what's your sort of turnover?
Oh, last year it was only about 26,000.
Oh, okay, all right.
It's going to be about double that this year, so it's tiny.
Yeah. So I don't think any of you might want a scheme of delegate. You know, if you had lots and lots of delegations, you know, rather than looking at like 10 or 20 different documents, you might want to pull them together into a single document. Yeah, okay. Sometimes you get dominant people, and sometimes particularly that can be somebody who's a founder, you know, who helped set the organization up. And there needs to be a bit of pushback, really, because as I say, trustees have a collective and individual responsibility, so you need to emphasize that. One person can't make a decision for the charity. It has to be a collective decision. And even if you as a trustee voted against or don't like that decision, if you continue to be a trustee, then you're just as responsible for that decision. Okay. And I know people, for instance, who quite often say, I want it minuted that I disagreed with this. Well, okay, but that won't help if it goes disastrously wrong, because the Charity Commission will say, well, you continue to be a trustee for the organisation, and therefore you're just as responsible for that decision. Okay. It might be useful to have some sort of code of conduct. Again, we've got templates that can help you to sort of like try and bang out exactly clearly that there needs to be decisions made by at trustee meetings, and that actually that trustee meetings need to encourage everyone to have their say, and that there are clear votes rather than everyone just sort of like, sort of like silence is assent, not saying anything and just doing whatever one person says. There's an important role for the chair here, and I know there's a problem if the dominant person is the chair, but actually, again, chair is a delegated role. Going back to my previous point, even if you look at modern charity constitutions, it says actually the chair is appointed by the other trustees, and that role can be removed at any point in time, because it recognizes that actually being a chair is a delegated role. And if the other trustees don't like how that person's doing it, they get rid of them. But they also clearly set out what's required for that role. So you ought to have a good role description for a chair. But one way of dealing for a chair to deal with a dominant person is it suggests there is to get them to sit next to you so they feel a bit important because they're next to the chair, for instance. And then you try and deal with them. It's not easy, but there are some ideas there. And obviously, like talking to people outside of a meeting. And it's like anything. It's always trying to nip it in the bud as soon as it appears rather than let it ride, and then it becomes a standard way of doing it. And the other thing sometimes is to try and manage them by trying to get other trustees, either encourage other trustees to challenge that person, give them support outside of the meeting. But actually, if some of those people are a bit not so assertive, then maybe trying to find some other trustees who can sort of be a counterbalance against the dominant person. I guess the other thing is that people aren't engaged. They don't turn up to meetings, or they don't say very much. It's a bit of a downside. I know I said earlier, it's really difficult to find trustees. Quite often you try and, blackmail, force people to become trustees, you use a bit of guilt as a close friend to become a trustee. So they actually end up just being a passenger or a participant, a passenger or a prisoner. They're not really a participant. So really try and make sure you've got trustees who want to be trustees. And I think there is the idea actually that quite often we end up just asking people we know. It's the tap on the shoulder approach to getting new trustees. But actually research does show that advertising, almost in the same way as that you would advertise for a paid job, actually can work really, really well. You just need to do it in a very structured way and open it out. So again, we've got some resources about how to improve recruitment. I think the other reason why some people, don't get engaged is actually they either get bored with the meetings, they feel they're a waste of time. They're giving up an evening or an afternoon or something and find actually, they're not engaged in it. They don't really understand what's happening. So there's a responsibility on people that are organising the meetings to make sure they're well planned. Have a good agenda, send people very good papers that they can read before, that are very clear and concise, and maybe clearly point out what needs to be discussed and why. And then again, there's that role of the chair to encourage participation, particularly people who might be a bit shy and a bit sort of retiring, that to actually have their say, and maybe try and find ways to engage them outside of the meeting. Trustees sometimes feel a bit distant from the work. And although they might get reports at the trustees meetings, maybe you can get them to come and see what you're doing in the flesh, so that actually they live and breathe a bit more, and they can see that actually spending their couple of hours every couple of months actually is worthwhile because of the work that's being done on the ground. If people aren't involved, then maybe you might need to use a bit of a stick to emphasize that actually, if you don't turn up to meetings, you are a trustee. So if it goes wrong, you're still just as responsible and liable, and therefore you need to make the effort to do so. And I suppose ultimate nuclear option is if they're not really, if they're a waste of space, well then get rid of them and find ways to remove them. Yeah. That's another good reason for having fixed term for trustees. You know, if your constitution says, you know, they're appointed for 3 years, and, you know, after 3 years you can say, oh well, thank you very much, you know, but actually we don't think you need to reapply to be a trustee next time. Sometimes, you know, we avoid when making tough decisions, but again, you know, you need to emphasize to people that they do have this buck does stop with them and decisions need to be made. But actually sometimes it could be because it's not clear. So as I said, sort of having a good agenda and papers that are very clear about what decisions need to be made, and make sure that information's given is not too much or too little. I know it's a delicate balance, you know. Generally, the more important or the more complex the options are, the more detail you'll need. If it's a very simple one, it can be a couple of sentences. Yeah. But it's just to be very clear what the decision is and consider the options. And sometimes you might need some expert advice. And, you know, we're always, if you don't have it with, you know, within your own contacts, then of course come to us as a first stop shop. And if we don't know, then we probably could advise you to who to go to instead. A good way of managing the agenda is sometimes to put important items first. You know, otherwise you put them at the end, they'll slip off the agenda, you know, until you'll run out of time. And maybe the most controversial in the middle. You know, the idea is you can get first good bits of decisions done first of all, so people feel a bit more positive. And then if you're going to have a much longer controversial bit where people aren't going to be so collectively in favour, then have it there. And then you have something afterwards again where hopefully you'll get more unanimous, you know, support. And again, this is a role of the chair really, is really, you know, once there has been a discussion, be clear to summarize the issues and a clear decision, and then they can be minuted. And that's important for the minute taker, whoever that might be, to be clear actually what decision has been made. And in fact, that can be a good way of managing that as well, because the minute taker can say, okay, I just want to check, is that what's been decided? Or that, you know, so that they reflect back so the decision is very clear for everyone. Most of you are quite small charities, so some of your trustees might be very involved in day-to-day running. And in that case, really, you should try and separate out sort of the day-to-day decisions from the more strategic ones. Maybe have separate meetings, like 2 hours of meeting, or even 2 separate meetings, but actually be very clear that a trustee meeting is talking about long-term strategic policies, long-term financial stuff, but then maybe talking about the arrangements for a fund day or for communications strategy and publications and promotion and the website, for instance, which is more day-to-day stuff, happens elsewhere. Yeah. Minutes are really important. You know, they are basically official and legal of what was decided at a meeting. So they are important stuff. And quite often I see minutes that, you know, for instance, aren't very clear about what was decided. They may not even be clear who was there and who had a vote. So for instance, it might have present and it might include members of staff, volunteers, observers. So it's not clear who has a vote. So, you know, you can have present, and that would be those who have a vote, your trustees or committee members. And then you might have something like in attendance, and it might say, you know, the name of the person, you know, like manager, or it might say volunteer, or it might say, you know, independent bookkeeper. So it's very clear right at the top who's there and who has a vote. So when they're written, they should be, you know, you think about who the audience are. So it's a reminder for those who attended, but also for those who weren't there, those who gave their apologies. So it should give them a clear idea about what was discussed, what decision was made, and why the decision was made. So it's not a word for word record. So minute taking is a bit of a skill. Again, we've got some advice and support. There's some very basic tips there on the left hand side, but they should have those sort of like bullets that I've got there. Okay, The other problem you've got is an over-engaged board. So although, you know, the trustees and committee have the overall responsibility for the charity, sometimes they can get worried about letting go, and they can end up micromanaging. You know, they want to get absolute detail of the day-to-day running, and that's not what a trustee board is about. That's for people who are doing it day to day. So it could be volunteers, and some of your trustees might be those volunteers, but there might be other volunteers involved. And in some organisations, there will obviously be paid staff as well. And the committee is about governance and strategic decisions. It's not about day to day running management. And therefore, a committee will tend to delegate and shouldn't micromanage. And there's a fine line between the two. I quite like this thing from Mike Hudson, from one of his quite useful books, Managing Without Profit, where he tries to basically show the difference between governance, which is what a trustee board should be doing, and the management, which will be those people who are delivering and running day-to-day services. So, you know, the board sets the overall vision, mission, and values, so the framework for the charity, and then those who are managing work within that. Trustees shape strategy and ensure impact, and they propose strategy, deliver impact, and so on. So it's quite a useful sort of like way to think about the difference between trustees and the day-to-day staff and volunteers that are running the charity. Another thing is about leaving financial responsibility to a treasurer. Most people don't like thinking about money. They don't like figures, don't like maths, and therefore they breathe a sigh of relief if they find a treasurer who can take it on board, but then leave it all to them. And that's doubly why I think treasurers are probably the hardest role to find on a trustee board. One is people who feel comfortable with dealing with figures and numbers, but secondly, some people have had bad experiences where it's all been left to them and their shoulders, and they don't want to get in that situation again. So you should have a clear delegation for your treasurer. So it's clear what they can and cannot do. It's also a way to make sure they don't become a dominant person and take over financial. I'm working with a charity, a local charity at the moment, where they've had a treasurer like that, and the other trustees have never got the financial information that they wanted in the way they wanted it. Luckily, that person's just going, so that's been luck rather than trying to actually push him out. But actually, that's certainly a live issue for one local charity at the moment. So really, you know, there should be a discussion between your treasurer and the rest of the committee about actually how you want financial reports written and presented. And very often, all I see are things like Excel spreadsheets or a table of numbers. And of course, for most people, they don't know what that means. So you should try and get your treasurer to put some text that explains what these mean. And at the end of the day, it might just be pointing out where things are much better than expected, or where things aren't going so good, and maybe what decisions need to be made. You know, do we need to cut back on something? What should we cut back on? What's the least important stuff that we can stop doing? Or just positively, actually, we've got more money than we need. So what more should we do? Because as charities, you're not there to hoard money. You're there to spend your money to create community public benefit. So actually, if you've got more money than you need, then you might need to decide, well, what more shall we do? More of what we're already doing or something new? So that's a decision for the trustees to make. And again, making sure that financial decisions are emphasised and clear again in the minutes. You know, again, I quite often see that, you know, on agenda, there'll be like some sort of financial report, but as I said, usually it's just a list of figures. And it wasn't clear in the papers work whether that's just for information or whether actually trustees have got to make a decision either because something's wrong or something's very good. And because it's not clear, because most trustees don't feel very comfortable about with figure works and financial management, I think it's important maybe when you get somebody new to look at induction, reading and training for them. So we're running a training course about financial governance for trustees. I think I'm going to be doing it again in the autumn. We've got some stuff on our website about financial governance. The Charity Commission have a very good 5-minute read about financial decision making. And I've got a link at the end to the 5-minute reads. But, you know, think about actually when you've got a trustee, what they need to know. This isn't really governance, but I think I would shove it in because I think an organisation needs to understand the difference about workers, volunteers, and self-employed. And you need to be clear because it protects the rights of workers, but also from the organisation's point of view, so that you don't end up with legal and financial responsibility. Thing about volunteers is probably easier. So if they're a volunteer, they can only receive reasonable expenses of volunteering. If you give them anything extra, they could then be seen as an employee and will have employee rights. And people have gone to tribunals, volunteers have gone to tribunals and have successfully argued, either because they've, for instance, been given a £10 a day flat rate for volunteering, for instance, or perhaps that they have been sent on a training course that's got nothing to do with their role. Let's say you've got someone who is looking after the website for you, but you know they want to get into childcare as a job. So basically you send them on a childcare training course as a thank you, which you think is reasonable. You know, it would sound reasonable as a thank you, but actually that's seen as a benefit for them, a taxable benefit, and therefore could be evidence that actually they're an employee. So they're volunteers, only get a reasonable expenses, and have no obligation for them to be there, or else they'd be punished. And again, you know, you can talk to our volunteer people around good practice of volunteer management and agreements and dealing with problems and issues that might happen with your volunteers. What is complicated is the difference between workers and self-employed. It is very complicated. Just someone saying I'm self-employed or signing an agreement that they're self-employed doesn't wash. You know, there have been all those people in the gig economy where people have successfully gone to say that actually we are employees, like DPD is an example. They started off with all their drivers being self-employed, but now they're workers. And some of the things that they had was they had to have vans with logos on, they had to wear the uniform. So actually, even though they were signed agreement to say they were self-employed, in fact, when they went to court, their union went to court, found they weren't. And there are lots of other examples of this. So there's a complicated list of questions that you need to make sure. And it can go wrong for you because I know quite a lot of organisations use self-employed status because they don't want to have the complication of PAYE and then having a shed load of policies and procedures for their employees. But if it does go wrong, you can lose out in all sorts of ways, financially and legally. So don't assume. Check. At HMRC have a status tool of a number of questions that you can answer that will give you tell you whether somebody is truly self-employed or a worker, but don't play the game. I've come across organizations that have done it, didn't get the answer they liked, so they did it again to get the answer they liked. So you know, it's not a cast iron, but you know, do it truthfully as you see it at the moment. And if you come up with the answer you don't like, well, then maybe change the relationship you've got at the moment. Don't do the questionnaire again to get the answer you want. Because the complication is my bullet point above, is that actually people can be workers and self-employed in different jobs, but even for the same employer. You know, you might be paying them to do one job and you might be paying them for another role, and one of them might be a worker and one of them might be self-employed. So I've just banged this up. Really, this is from HMRC. These are the sorts of questions that you have to sort of answer on this sort of questionnaire. And you can see that it isn't just an easy set of questions to go through. But you know, it even says here, if most are true, it's not as if at least one or all of them, they're saying most are true. At the end of the day, it will end up being a court that will decide, because it is so complicated. But this gives you a bit of an idea. So this is the questions that if you say yes to most of them, they're likely to be workers. So I said you'll get this in the slides. Self-employed is probably even more complicated, because you know, you've got two lists. One at the top where if you say to yes to at least one of them, they are likely to be. So, for instance, can the worker hire someone to do the work? Quite a lot of the gig economy cases that have won, it's been shown, in fact, that people couldn't replace, or even if the agreement said they could replace, in practice they couldn't, because the courts will always look at actually what happens in real life, not what was in a written agreement, but what happens in real life. So people were saying that actually, you know, because the rules said that the people had to have a uniform or they have to be available on this app, that actually they couldn't find a replacement. So basically, even though their agreement said they could find a replacement, practically that was impossible to do. And then you've got yes to more of those below. So it's very complicated. So always check. Right. I'll stop sharing for a bit. That's the end of my sort of banana skins. So really, the rest of it was down to you. Did you have any questions about that or anything else that's happening in your organization you wanted to get a bit of advice and support on? Hopefully people Jenna.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say, no, it takes me a while to everything to soak in.
Sure.
And think about it. So
Yeah.
I might have questions once I've kind of reanalyzed it all in my brain. Is that all right? That's just how I work.
Yeah, yeah. And as I said, you know, even if it occurs to you at 1 o'clock in the morning, send me an email or something. Don't ring me. But
yeah, cool. Thank you. Yeah.
Is there anything else that is happening in your charity, your organization, that you're unsure about in terms of governance that you want to ask me?
Yeah, Steve, I've got one.
Yes, Rachel.
So we've been going backwards and forwards a little bit, ruminating about, you know, we'd like, we're really lucky. Our workshops are currently run by volunteers who give us a lot of their time. But if we want to run more workshops, which is part of our objectives as a charity, we could do it if we paid some people. So I was optimistically drawing up a job description for a freelance events person, and then got talking to Sonia
Okay, yes.
about this is going to be great, isn't it? And she, because we need almost the freedom to not tie ourselves in financially, because we don't know whether it's like a proof of concept. We don't really know whether it will work. And she's like, well, technically, she got into the nitty gritty. It's like, well, technically that's a worker, so they're employed, so you've got holiday, etc., etc. And of course, I don't want to, it's not our intention to treat anybody badly. It's more the fact that we're not sure whether we can afford an employee.
Yeah, okay.
And yet we want to do more of what we do. Yeah.
Well, I suppose the alternative to look at is in terms of, okay, so if you take them as a worker, then you'll have those responsibilities around leave. But you could look at a 0 hours contract. I know that 0 hours contracts have been given a bad press but actually quite a lot in the HR world have said actually quite a lot of people like 0 hours contracts. It's when people misuse them. You know, that actually, for instance, you know, Sports Direct do know they need to be open 8 till 8, 6 days a week. They do know that they need a certain number of staff to be present. So, you know, why are they offering 0 hours contracts? Whereas if people are doing stuff that's not regular and therefore only need people on occasions, then 0 hour contracts work fine. The downside with them usually is that obviously there's no obligation. You know, you're not promising to give them like 10 hours a week, but also on their side, they're not saying that we will work with you for 10 hours a week. So you could ring them up and say, look, we want you to work on August the 10th for 2 hours. Can you? And they could quite rightly say no, and you might be left in the you know, in the poo. But you know, 0 hours contract would be something worth exploring in terms of reducing your ongoing liability for employment. Okay, anyone else? No. Okay, well, like I said, you can always come back to me if you've got stuff, or whether you don't feel you can share it with the rest of the group, which I can understand as well. Then contact me or Becky. I'm just going to share my screen again. Oh, wrong one. Okay, so I'd quickly like you to do a quick evaluation form. I've in the chat box, I've put a link to a quick evaluation form. If you could quickly do that, and then I've got a couple of final slides. So if you do that in a couple of minutes, that hopefully won't take you very long. So just click on the link and it should take you to an online form to do. People need a bit more time. Is it okay if I move on? Okay, right. I think, you know, just to go back to that thing I said right at the very beginning, you know, although there's an awful lot of stuff there maybe to process, but again, if you just go away with that basic principle about always acting in the best interest of your charity and its beneficiaries, then you'll mostly be fine. So I should have explained this term beneficiaries. It's a term that the Charity Commission uses because your beneficiary might not be people. So actually, Scrap Store. Who else is your beneficiary?
There are individuals, households, groups, schools, etc., who benefit, but also the suppliers themselves.
No, suppliers don't. They might, but actually, in charitable purposes, who else is a beneficiary of your charity? That's not a person. Well, okay, it's the environment.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah. So I think the rest of you probably are all going to be individuals, but you know, so the Charity Commission uses that term beneficiaries rather than users or people, because actually some charities might be benefiting non-living or cats and dogs, for instance, so not just people. So, you know, help and support. I think a couple of times I've mentioned, obviously we're sort of good first stop shop for any advice and support you've already got. So if your office, if you're located in Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole, then I'm the first stop shop. If you're across the border in Dorset Council area, then it's Becky. So there's her telephone number and email address. Obviously, the Charity Commission is got lots of stuff there about governance, but it's a bit of a beast. And actually, what I would do is, if you're looking for something specific, Google that. Don't start off going to the Charity Commission homepage. Just put Charity Commission, then look whatever you're looking for. Financial decision making, or removing a trustee, or decision making, or membership, and see what pops up. But in terms of a good start, they have these 5-minute guides. Now they're aimed at trustees, but they're good for anyone within a charity to understand actually how a charity has to run itself. There are about 6 of them now on different aspects. One's financial decision making, I've talked about. One is decision making generally. Another one is about your purpose, i.e. the objects. Another one is about political campaigning. One has been added because of the government thing around terrorism. You might feel it's not particularly relevant to you, but they are very good, and they come as a small video with some text as well, so they're quite good. NCVO has quite a lot of stuff online as well, and again, probably rather than go to the home page, put in NCVO and then whatever you're looking for, and something will pop up with stuff that they've got. Some of their materials are open to everyone for free. Some are only available to their members. If your turnover is less than 30,000, so your total income in the year is, in fact, membership is free. So if you quite a few probably will fall into that category. If you really want technical stuff, then there's the Chartered Governance Institute for UK and Ireland. Now that covers the private sector as well as not-for-profit, but they do have quite a few stuff that's aimed at charity trustees, for instance, like conflict of interest, scheme of delegation, roles and responsibilities of charity trustees, that sort of stuff. A bit more technical, probably aimed at larger organizations that maybe need more detailed stuff, but always worth a look. And again, you can sign up for a newsletter and alerts if you want to find out what they're doing new. I think you're all members, so actually you don't need to know about membership, but do make use of it. That you get these newsletters from us. Maybe look at the one that comes out on a Thursday, Know Your Stuff, that I tend to put together, which usually has things around changes in legal and good practice for running a charity, but also the Members Zone. So there's a bit of the Members Zone that has quite a lot of information, links to other guidance, templates, and so on, which we're going to carry on adding to. There's still some gaps in it, but over the next 6 months, we want to basically add more and more stuff to it. So, go to our Members Zone to see if we've got stuff there already that you can make use of, rather than wait for us to email it to you, for instance. Yeah. Okay, so as I said, I think probably next week now, Chris will send you an email that will have a link to the recording, plus a copy of the slides. And as I said, get in contact with me or Becky if you've got any queries or questions after today. So that's it. Thank you very much for coming along. I hope it's been useful, and enjoy running your charity.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Bye.